Mhm. Hello, hello, and welcome to all of you beautiful soul sisters. Thank you for joining me here today on the Heart of the Soul podcast. My name is Amana, and I am so happy that you're here. This is a space where we explore what it means to be wild women walking upon this earth, connecting about that which is often unseen and unspoken through the ancient ritual of storytelling. It's my hope that soaking in these stories will bring you closer to your own innate knowing and center you into a more embodied and alive version of your beautiful, unique self. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Our moon is currently waxing, building towards our next full moon in Taurus on November 15th, this upcoming Friday. I am honored and thrilled to have one of my favorite authors with me here today, Judith Berger. Her book, Herbal Rituals, feels like an old friend that I continue building a relationship with across the years. Each chapter provides connection to the months and invites connection to herbs, most potent in that season. This is a book that I've gifted to my own mother, to my sister, to friends. I highly recommend it. Judith Berger has been studying and practicing herbal medicine since 1986. She's the author of this book, Herbal Rituals, by St. Martin's Press in 1998. She has written numerous articles on incorporating herbal allies into one's life. In 2008, she received her licensure as a physician's assistant in order to better serve her clients and patients interested in integrative care. She continues to spend much of her free time in the mountains and fields of New York State, receiving and learning more about the gifts of the plant world. She believes that natural medicine is our birthright, and that imbibing herbs in many forms provides vitality and pleasure, the root of all well-being. Judith, I am so excited to have you here today. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Very, very exciting to be here with you.
Yes. Yes. So I read on your email then that you recently had a 3-day solitary retreat. I wonder if you might just maybe first take a moment and tell people where you are in the world, and then maybe share a story or two about the solitary retreat and this annual tradition that you have.
Sure. So I am currently in the Eastern Catskills of New York State, which has really been my terra madre for many, many years. Even when I was a little girl, I went to summer camp on the other side of the Catskills, in the Western Catskills in Sullivan County. And it was really my first impression of the natural world because I had grown up in Brooklyn. So really the only nature would have been in the backyard, which was fine. But that was very intermixed with lots of city sounds. Um, and I distinctly remember during that camp experience, because it was a Jewish camp, on the Sabbath, on Saturdays, there was no driving, no writing, no listening to music. So I remember walking up the road in the golden hour of the afternoon and just seeing in the beams of light the dragonflies and the twitching of the tails of the cows and the scent of the mown grass. And I bring it up because it actually relates to my 3-day pause that I take every year. And actually, since in the last year, I actually try to take at least part of a day or a full day every week as well, because the internet is overwhelming in terms of how far away it can take us from the direct connection with the natural world, how much it can keep us in our mental faculties exclusively. We don't have to use any of the other senses when we're staring into a screen. And much of our connection with the natural world is really dependent on using our sense of smell and taste and touch, as well as what we see. And I find that the quieting down that can happen, and it takes a while to quiet down. 3 days isn't even really quite enough for all the chatter to go away. If you're out of practice, I was a little bit out of practice, um, but it is important because I find that the older I get, the more clutter there is in my mind, the more experiences pile up and can take me away from actually being in the mind state that's more right hemisphere, where my dreams come to the forefront. And the way that that there's so many different languages to describe things in the world. And I think the internet can kind of dilute the multiplicity of languages and portals through which we can apprehend experience. So in my 3 days, I get really, really good sleep because I have to be really rested to have more interesting dreams. Many people say that the veil between the worlds is thinner at this time of the year, which originally was why I would take that pause on Halloween and Day of the Dead. There are, practitioners who work with the dead on a daily basis and say that the veil is thin all the time. So that may be true as well. um, yeah. So for me, in my time that I take away from digital, there's a time where I have to kind of get settled. And then I always make sure to spend as much time as possible in the forest. I'm a real forest person. Some people are lake people, ocean people. For me, it has to be forest. And I like going higher in the mountains of New York State because once you get above 3,500 feet, there'll be boreal forest. And so the scent of balsam fir is just so intoxicatingly wonderful. And when it isn't dry, you and I were talking before about how it is dry right now here, but normally it's also very spongy and mossy that high up. So I do spend a considerable amount of time during my 3 days out in the woods, and I don't talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
No talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do you walk most of that time? Do you sit? Do you dance? What do you do in the
Um, I don't really do much dancing. That's interesting though. I think because for me, the down and in, it just didn't happen like that. For me,
Mhm.
the dancing is more of a outwards celebratory kind of thing. And this was more like a kind of contemplative thing. But I do yoga because I've had a long time yoga practice. The old kind of yoga where you would do a pose and rest, do a pose and rest, which has disappeared a lot from the way people now practice. And that I've always found that unfortunate because I think it was that oscillation between the doing the pose and then receiving the energetics that the pose would cause within and without the body. It would really go into you with that back and forth. And then all of a sudden yoga became this forward, 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 stridey kind of running replacement. But anyway, in my pause, there's always candles, there's always different scents. So I gather spruce resin from the spruce trees,
Mhm.
and I always like to burn that um, around the house and outside as well.
Yes,
And 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 the resting and dreaming is part of it. Sometimes feelings will come up, you know, could be grief feelings. Sometimes there's aha moments. It's different every year
of
that I
course.
do it, and even within the 3 days. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. In Herbal Rituals, you speak about a ritual that you had, at least at the time when you wrote this book, of communing with Lillian, a grandmother of yours, during
Yeah.
that month of November or this month. Is that something
Yeah.
you continue to do or?
Well, now I actually have an entire altar to, the number of dead grows like the older you get.
Yes.
So I actually, every day, I call in all the dead that I know and think of. And then I ask for specific things from specific dead people. So it's actually expanded. Like when I wrote the book and I was so much younger, I didn't have that many dead people in my life, which actually is a very lucky thing. And so Lillian was more at the forefront. So now I do have this photo of her and I'm standing next to her. My
Mm.
hair is like brown and blonde because I remember I had dyed like the front of my hair blonde in my early 20s. And it's funny because she had this kind of smile that you could, like, she had a very particular laugh. So in the photo, she's smiling and I can hear the laugh when I
Oh,
look at the photo. Like, I still remember that real laugh that she had. Like, she really laughed, you
oh,
know?
how beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Laughter is
Yeah.
such good medicine. When we last spoke, you talked about learning from a woman who called herself a witch when you were younger, that kind of, can you tell me more about that or how the term witch and how you relate to it and the witchy realm and how that came into your life?
Well, without a doubt, and I know that this is actually a very common experience amongst herbalists, which is that we were all very drawn to the figure of the, oh, she could be an older woman or a non-old woman, but like deep in the forest who
Yeah.
lived in a hut with the hanging herbs.
Yes.
And I lived in that imaginal world pretty constantly when I was very young. I remember my room was very, very cold. And so I would actually put my back against the radiator and read my books, like glued to the radiator. And I specifically remember a number of books where, well, there were like different kinds of witchiness. So there was that like woman in the woods where it was hanging herbs and this connection to the idea that herbs caused altered states. And then there was also there were shapeshifter books that I read that were also, I was really, really drawn to particularly this like black raven kind of switchy thing that would go on with, um, which sometimes had a little bit of a sinister kind of tone to it, but that didn't bother me either. You know, it was just the idea that because of those stories of shape shifting, you never quite looked at a bird or an animal without thinking of them as sentient.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so I really appreciate that those tales were part of my upbringing because I also had like around that this Orthodox Jewish mythos that was much more tribal, very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was still the emphasis on dreams and interpreting dreams, things like that, but I way preferred these other stories. So then everything like, kind of goes into hiding unless you have a certain kind of nurturance, to where you're helped in keeping that part of yourself open. But that wasn't in my upbringing. And then in my early 20s, and I've talked about this before, um, I had a very unhappy medical experience. And I made the decision that I was going to take care of my own health. I didn't really know what that meant, but about 6 months later, uh, I read an article in a magazine uh, that had interviewed an herbalist who was a witch. And as soon as she started talking about being a witch, and she actually lived in New York State, I felt this like kind of beeline, like that. That was like my first thought, like that. And so I instantly like wrote them a letter because that was how you did things. And it was nice. There was something beautiful about the slowing down, the waiting, the fact that it's almost like fate is more prominent without the internet, because you literally have to stumble across things through the tactile, whether it's something that you're touching. Like in this case, the reason I was drawn to that interview was because the woman giving the interview was in a poetry class that I had taken in New York City. So it was her name that I recognized. So it was very like in person oriented. And I met this herbalist and did some studying, and then found somebody in New York City who I studied with for, I think, 4 or 5 years. But by then I was so wrapped in it. I felt like it wrapped around me and infused me. And it was as if I'd like taken a water bath in herbalism. It was just a homecoming and a very precious, precious thing, and entirely like a click, like so natural.
Mhm.
Yeah. So part of my entree with the herbs was as a green witch. And that's, a witch being someone who works with magic, works with the moon and the planets, does spells, things like that, makes their own uh, unguents and all of that together. So that was really my feeling of what being a witch was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Were there any parts of like, did you ever encounter people who, or did you ever have like a fear of the term witch or embodying witch? Like, I feel like some women, especially like if we grew up in Christianity, I know you grew up with Orthodox Judaism, like, was there that same fear of witchcraft or?
I didn't have it. I didn't have a fear of witchcraft. I mean, there was even a witchcraft store in the East Village at the time called Enchantments. And so I was aware that there were also different kinds of magic that people and witchcraft that people practiced.
Mhm.
Uh, there was the more druid path, there was the Aleister Crowley people. But for me, it was like so green witch oriented. And no, I think that I would say I probably have more fear, not of witchcraft, but fear in general, like now than I did in my 20s. I was still in my like immortality phase.
Mhm.
For better or for worse. I
Yes.
mean, it's a good time to take risks.
Yeah. Yeah. When we spoke last before this call, you talked about Bulgarian music and songs and how songs bring forth the thread of herbalism. I wonder if you could share now here today a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hidden places of the uh, historical lineage of herbalism is in folk songs. And it would go for, I think it stands for Bulgarian music. I know it from Ukrainian music as well. Mariana Sadovska, Ukrainian song collector who performs a tremendous amount right now in service of Ukraine. She had gathered songs from Ukrainian women in their villages, and I had met her in New York when she was teaching. And we learned some summer solstice songs, and both Basil and St. John's wort, or St. John's wort, however you like to call it,
You call it St.
appear.
John's wort? I've never heard someone call it St. John's wort, but I love that.
Yeah, that was kind of popular in the 80s, calling it St. John's wort. I'm
I'm,
such a dated herbalist.
I might call her that. We have her on the property here, and I make a St. John's wort oil. And yeah, okay. Sorry to interrupt your flow.
Yeah, it's fine. It's such a wonderful plant. Such a
Yeah.
wonderful plant, you know.
Yeah.
Um, there's also so anyway, one thing that's great when you learn about like a plant through music or through a story that's told is it gives you that sense of the layers of medicine. So it isn't just this plant does this for your body or something like that. And in that regard, so much about plant medicine is there's like an infinity to it. Like there's no end of learning from a particular plant. You can be into it in a light way or a very intensive way. You can use a lot of plants. You can use a few plants. You can drink something as a tea. You can make a flower essence from it. And so there's like so many touch points. And for me, what I liked about I always wondered because I didn't really study any music from my Russian Lithuanian background. It was only much more recently that I learned that my family was actually from southern Poland. Um, but in the past few years, a book came out called Ashkenazi Herbalism that actually followed um, the thread of on the ground, both male and female healers who used herbs in the areas where Jews were confined to in Eastern Europe. So it
Mm.
turned out that there actually was a heritage that I didn't know anything about. And it's a wonderful, very well researched book to learn about that if you have a Jewish Ashkenazi kind of background, which I do. So um, there's so many different ways to learn about the heritage of it. Some people have it much more directly, like their own mothers or grandmothers were herbalists or great grandmothers. I mean, in my family, food was much more the medicine than any kind of plant of
Hmm.
any kind. Although my whole family uses herbal medicine thanks to me, like liberally.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. I wonder if we talked about maybe you reading a little part from the November chapter here.
Oh, yeah.
That would be
I think also November is the first chapter I wrote.
oh,
So
and it's the first chapter in the book, right? Not
yeah.
introduction.
I had already decided to start the book in November. Because I wanted to sort of have it as a pre-birth that that we were going down and in order to then later on come back out, you know.
Yes.
And I think I'm sort of an extroverted introvert. So I really love when the nights get longer and I can get all cozy and be inside. So I was actually feeling that as I was writing it.
Mm.
Um, so let me see. I'll read from the beginning. You just tell me when you want me to stop, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so the November chapter is called Visioning, Dreaming, Remembering. As a wild crafter, one who seeks out the plants on their home ground, respectfully gathering them for food and medicine, my very fingertips are in physical touch with November's gifts of coldness and death. This month brings with it a frequently lusterless sky and biting chill that keens through grove, forest, park, and street, a whistling canticle of winter's swift descent over the land. As I assemble my tools, knife, root digger, and spade, in the small willow basket, which also contains a small pouch of cornmeal, I toss in my wool gloves with open fingers and cloak myself warmly to bear the sting of the wind, which I know will dog my face during the hours outdoors. Harvesting in November brings one into conscious contact with a retreating, somewhat unyielding earth, and with a heightened awareness of the growing slenderness of resources. The hardening ground requires that I increase my labor if I am to pull roots from her body, for she is contracted, clasping with passionate force tubers, corms, and rhizomes close to her breast, where an invisible underground heart pumps warm life into the roots of plants and trees all winter long. As I part the rosebush branches, I must sharpen my eyes in the gray pallor of winter's light and reach in deeply to find hips that have not yet taken on the shriveled countenance of the death throne.
Yeah, maybe right there we can pause.
Yeah.
So we have rose hips on the land here, although most of them are sort of shriveled now. But I thought it would be a sweet time to just show a wild rose hip.
Oh, so that's from Rosa rugosa, a nice big fat rose hip.
And then here's a tinier one. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And you, in this book, you talk about making a rose hip apple cider vinegar. And I thought maybe you just would want to share about that and why you enjoy doing that.
Well, it's it's so funny because now that there's an internet, it takes like negative half a second to find a million herbal recipes
Sure.
for whatever. At the time, uh, in my learning, vinegar was just an excellent menstruum to hold minerals and vitamins in solution. Obviously not A, D, E, and K because they're fat. They need to be in fat. But so rose hips is very rich in vitamin C, which we all know is just excellent for your immune system, the kind of immunity that you need in the wintertime when you're
Hmm.
just going to pick up colds and things like that. Um, but it's also the color that I really like, that bright red color. And so you mix it, you fill up your jar with rose hips. And I've only used from the wild rose. I haven't used from Rosa rugosa. So my rose hips are, I don't take out the seeds or anything. I just put them right in and then
Hmm.
put the vinegar over it, leave it for 6 weeks, and then drink a teaspoon as needed, or put it in soup. I also like to dry the rose hips because it's very, very common uh, to, if you think we're now in the age of tinctures, but for a long time, primary way of using herbal medicine would have been in water, boiling, simmering,
Mm.
or in like for unguents, it might have been in like animal fat from, whatever fat was left over from animals that were killed for food.
Hmm.
Um, but definitely not tinctures so much as there might have been ales, right? And I know Stephen Howard Puner has a wonderful book called Sacred and Herbal Healing Beers, where he
Hmm.
has a lot of recipes because you've got then the herb is fermenting along with the hops or whatever you're using to make the ale or the beer. And fermentation always increases medicinal properties of plants. So you're getting a different kind of medicine when you make an ale or a rosehip wine or anything like that. So I think it was very commonly used more in those ways. I'm not sure when vinegars became popular, but it would be interesting to find out. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I'm
Yeah.
sure when I was gathering them, I also like to make wreaths for holiday time. And I
Yes.
really like to put rose hips in them, rose hips and barberries, both. Barberry being one of my absolute favorite plants.
Mm.
And so I like to gather the berries to use in the wreaths as well.
Yes, beautiful. I love making evergreen wreaths myself. Yeah.
And do you make rosehip vinegar also?
I haven't yet. I've done other things with rosehip, but not the vinegar. But I was just
So
reminded
what else have you done with rose hips?
I've done like a infused oil that then I use on my skin, and I made like a soap with some of the oil.
Mm,
Yeah.
that sounds fun.
Yes. And then I've just eaten them and also looked up recently that they're in Sweden, which is my ancestry. They make rosehip soup. So, which would be quite a lengthy process to, because they were, you get the flesh and remove the seeds and create a soup from the rose hips.
Yes, and I know in England, rosehip jelly is a
Uh,
big thing.
yeah.
I have a Cornish friend. She's from Cornwall, and she is a really amazing jam maker. I've made gooseberry jam with her, but I do know that she makes like rosehip jellies, and that you can find really old recipes for rosehip jelly.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Oh, it's
So,
making me
I'll
hungry.
have to try. Yes. I'll have to try that someday. Okay, so the word you in your last email, you spoke to the word spirit, that it is also the root of the adjective spirited, having or showing mettle, courage, vigor, or liveness. I always like to ask guests what soul means to them. So I would love to hear from you, like what does spirit mean to you and what does soul mean to you? Some people use them interchangeably, some people define one distinctively different than the other.
You know, it's funny because for me, there is a sense that they're distinct from one another. Um, and and I experience them physically in a way. Like for me, the idea of soul has a yearning in it. There's a yearning in it. There's a little dollop of melancholy in it. There's a there's this there's a sense of being moved by minor chords in music. um that's how I think of soul. Spirit Spirit is a little bit of a has I think a little baggage in it. In the 1980s, there was like a big new age movement and it was very ungrounded and it had too much positivity. And fortunately, a lot of that has been called out now, even though I think there are people who still like fall into that rabbit hole. But I think there's a lot more recognition that there's a kind of way that you don't really want to rise above things, or like there was a sort of like rising energy to spirit that was very ungrounded.
Mhm.
Um, which is why in my Substack page that I write and wrote about spiritedness, it was why I wanted to bring out the character of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, because she undergoes a very, very harsh upbringing. She's orphaned, she's given to an aunt and uncle who treat her very differently and then send her off to an orphanage where at the time the orphanages, many kids died in the orphanages from starvation and from freezing to death. And she comes through all of that, and within her circumstances, she makes art, which I didn't actually talk about that part of her that much in the piece, but she definitely comes out of it with the benefit of education and a tutor, a female tutor, like a mentor at that orphanage. She comes out with a certain solidity and spiritedness, but the soul part of her, I think, is actually present really early in the book. She's sitting in a window seat. It's a November day. It's really rainy. So she's hiding behind these red velvet curtains to escape being bullied by her step cousins or whoever they are, the little kids who bully her. And she's actually reading this famous British book about birds. And there's a lot of drawings of the birds. They're from all over the world. And the narrator actually shows her drifting imagination into these other creatures and other worlds. So that's kind of like the kind of way I think of spirit and spiritedness. She throws a tantrum when she's bullied. That's her spiritedness. Her drifting off is when her spirit is, kind of dreaming, like the way that, some people just drift a lot and they're just made that way. But I actually think children aren't fully here on Earth for quite a number of years from whatever elsewhere they come from into Earth. It takes years for them to settle, some more than others. It kind of depends, it's very unique. But I think that whatever that is more spirit than soul.
Yeah.
That kind of dreaminess sitting in the windowsill.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love asking that because I've never received the same answer.
It's a great question.
Yeah. So in your book throughout, you like interweave stories of different goddesses and these archetypes. And is it mugwort, which you also call cronewort, is it Artemis? And you call mugwort a mystical pathway into the dream realm. I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit more about.
Yes, yes. And it's funny because mugwort makes a really nice vinegar. It's very high in, it's got a lot of calcium and magnesium in it. But what I really like is it's got this kind of bitter, volatile oil thing. It's like a peppery, volatile oil. And cronewort was one of the earlier words that the green witches were using for it. And if you smoke it or you put it in pillows, you want to get that volatile oil on your fingertips and then bring it to the nose so that it kind of can travel up the olfactory nerves. And then it will absolutely impact your dreams without a doubt. I know people who use it in smoke mixes. There was an herbalist I knew, he died, Paul Tappenden. He was a real forager in Nyack area. And he had like a video where he had rolled up the mugwort leaves in a ball. And then he would like take a match. He would make like a little depression in the top of that and then set it alight and then inhale the smoke. It has a really lovely scent. I like to burn it with lavender together. Lavender is like super sweet. And, many people will make smudge sticks with a combination of mugwort in it. So it has all the silvery plants have a lunar association. And of course, Artemis is connected to the moon. Although there's many Artemises, like the Greek Artemis associated with wolves, many, many breasts. There's sometimes she's associated with wolves, owls. It can really depending on what myth you're reading and what time period it's in. But I think the kind of witchy manifestation is that she's kind of, Artemis is like the maiden, she's the huntress and the keeper of the moon. I would say that it's more the plant, mugwort, that carries uh, the way that it's a portal to the dream world. You will definitely have more interesting dreams if you inhale the smoke of it, or just the peppery oils will definitely do that. And I also have had it in pasta. And I remember when we made pasta, we ended up sort of descending into a fit of giggliness. So I'm not sure if that's another side effect. But there's not really nothing like wild foods, really nothing like them. They are just, talk about spirited. If you want to really feel like what wild really means, it's the wild plants that, they're just like immediately carrying that. And if you eat them, you become them, you know?
Yes, yes, wonderful. Well, I know we're sort of coming towards a close, but I wonder if you
Okay.
might share something about trees as family and what you mean by that, and if there's maybe a story there or not.
Well, let's see. For me, it's just where I belong is amongst trees. I just settle completely when I'm in the forest, and it could be a forest of hemlock trees, or I could be lying on my back and looking up and seeing the poles of the trunks and then their canopy and the sky coming through. In the mountains in the Catskills, often when you get past 3,500 feet and then you have to do rock scrambles and you get to the top and maybe it's 4,000 or 3,800 feet. And then you're on like a flat that is completely full of those balsam fir trees. And so you're just completely enveloped in the sense of them. And there are certain places where I feel the spirits that live inside the trees more than other trees. I'm not really sure why that is, if it has to do with age or it just has to do with how encumbered I am that day by what we call our regular daily lives that can actually keep us from the important things in life, which are being amongst the family of trees. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I have to rest my back against tree trunks. I have to lay my cheek against their bark. I have to touch them. It's just something that yeah, I do feel a kind of kin with different trees. And I'm sure there are ones that are completely unknown to me because I haven't been everywhere in the world. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Is there anything else that is stirring your soul right now that you would like to share before you tell people where they can find you and all the things?
Oh, I think I think that what I'd like to say for anybody who's starting out with herbal medicine would be to start with one plant that's accessible or reminds you of something in some way, whether when you were sick, your grandmother made you chamomile tea or something like that. And to take a deep dive with all the senses and and then also let the spirit roam. So your imagination might hear other things about the plant so that you don't get too boxed in too quickly by information. At the same time, it's really a potent, radical reality that we can use plant medicine to bring us into a better state in our health. And that's a radical thing at this moment in time because it's free medicine and it is our birthright medicine. And there's a lot of, I feel a lot of gratitude in a kind of heart swelling way that these plants can sustain me and bring me back to balance when I'm out of balance. And that I don't have to use things in plastic wrappings and I don't have to go to the pharmacy and use this stuff that has absolutely no connection to me at all. And instead I have this life force and life form on the planet that does not mind sharing its body with me so that I can feel better and carries within it the understanding and the memory of that wholeness and will just pull my body back to that wholeness in its unique way.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing us to a close with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I will include links to everything you speak of here, but I'm wondering if you can share with people where they can find you and the ways that they might be able to connect and work with you.
Yeah, so the best way to find me is actually through my Substack page. I write a column. You can be a paid or a free subscriber. You get different things depending. And I always write about plant medicine, but also natural world and other writers and myth and poetry, all of which are my loves. So that's the best place to find me. I do have a website. It's very basic at judithbergerherbalist.com. My Substack page is called Medicine of the Forest. Very easy to find me. And
your book is available.
Oh yes, my book is available. Right. So after I got the rights back from St. Martin's Press, I republished it on Blurb. So it's a print-on-demand book. And the links to that are both on my website page and any of my missives on Substack. It's usually at the end.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, it's been such a joy to be with you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really lovely to have such a shining presence across from me for an hour.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in and choosing to spend time with me today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of The Heart of the Soul. I would truly appreciate if you might choose to leave a rating, review, or share the show with someone that you know. You can support this podcast by donating to it using the PayPal or Venmo links. If you have stories that you would like to share on The Heart of the Soul, please send me an email through my website. I would love to hear from you. If you would like to work with me, I have both one-on-one and group offerings, online and in person. Find out more on my website, birthingnova.love. If you're listening on Spotify, you can now even send me a voice message. Until next time, remember, be brave, be love, be wild, be you, because you are the only you, and be the change that you seek for yourself and for the generations to come. Sending each of you so much love. Love, love, love. Mwah.